Chapter 7 of The Web of Indian Life by Sister Nivedita, Margaret E. Noble. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7 The Indian Sagas. Unseen but all-pervasive in the life of every community is the great company of the ideals. No decalogue has half the influence over human conduct that is exercised by a single drama or page of narrative. The theory of chivalry interests us, but the idols of the king help to mold our character. The whole of history, insofar as it may be known, is the common possession of the race. But, in addition to this, every language makes its own contribution of literary creations, and national custom determines the degree in which these shall become available to all classes of the community, thereby reacting upon the national type. Few have considered how much might be done to ennoble and dignify common life in England by a wider dispersion of the love for Shakespeare. As it is, the Bible being the only book that is used in this sense, the careers and opinions of a few Syrian shepherds are apt to be more potent among us than that great Brutus, Desdemona, Horatio, and their kindred, who are the offspring of the genius of our countrymen, and in some sense therefore the fruit of English civic life itself. It is said that in Greece the poetry of Homer and Euripides is known amongst the poorer classes to this day, and certain it is that the Catholic Church has done a great and little understood service in bringing the lives of the saints of all countries to bear upon the development of each. Every man habitually measures himself against some model, therefore every addition to the range of available types is to be welcomed. A king feels himself to be one of a class of royal persons who must not be only authoritative but also picturesque in their behavior, and, whether he likes it or not, by this standard he knows himself to stand or fall. His very rank forces his pattern upon him. Amongst those of smaller place and greater personal freedom, capacity more readily shows its own complexion. Some of us, were our commonplace faculties touched with divine fire, would find our destiny in the qualities of the ideal merchant and administrator. That peculiar form of integrity, dignity, and wisdom that belongs to such a function would prove to be ours, or attainable by us. But although this is probably the commonest logical issue in English national life at present, it does not follow that every Englishman is fitted to achieve it. Here and there, especially perhaps among the Celtic contingent, we find one born for the quite different goal of perfect knighthood. Loyalty to leader and comrade, sympathy for the oppressed, far-shining fearlessness and love of freedom are traits characteristic of an age of chivalry, and persons who embody them represent such a period, it being neither more or less admirable than that of merchant prince and caravan chief. The possibilities of one man lead toward sainthood, of another to poetry, of a third to science or mechanics. One gravitates into leadership, another as naturally becomes disciple. One enjoys knowledge, another ignorance. Were all of us developed to our own utmost, we may take it that every place in life would be filled, every part in the world drama played, but by men and women of such ripe and determined personality that we could no more confuse one with the other than we could mistake the conduct of Helen of Troy for that of Elizabeth of Hungary, or hers for that of Faust's Gretchen. We have to notice, moreover, that in European life only the born idealist is deeply influenced by any nature of miscellaneous characters of history and literature. Religion alone amongst us can exercise this compelling power on a large scale, and this is related to the fact that only religion gives ideals themselves as motives. Circumstances have in many cases offered such a setting that a life has been forced into brilliance and distinction, but the self-born intention of the saints could never be wholly fulfilled. Iphigenia could hardly have refused her sacrifice. Joan of Arc, on the contrary, must always have felt that the sword of Michael might have been held still more stainless and with a greater courage. It is this fact that gives to the ideals of religion their supreme power of individuation. We must remember also that they differ from others in making a universal appeal. The girl who aimed at becoming Portia would be guilty of vanity. She whose model is the Blessed Virgin receives the respect of all. To imitate Socrates would be a miserable affectation. To imitate the religious hero is regarded as a common duty. It may seem impossible to dower the heroes and heroines of literature with this projective energy of the lives of saints, but in India, as to some extent in Iceland, the feat has been accomplished. For India is also one of the saga lands. At every lull in her history we may hear the chanting of her bards, and the joy of her people in the story of their past. The long twilight of the North is no better adapted to the growth of such a literature than the deep and early night of the South. In verandas and courtyards, with the women concealed behind screens at the back, it has been the Indian fashion for hundreds of years through the winter months to gather at dusk round the seat of the wandering teller and listen hour after hour to his stirring theme. Surrounded by lights and flowers, gay carpets, and burning incense, there is in this performance a mixture of reading, song, and story. It is something of opera, sermon, and literature all in one. Ever since the commencement of our era, the Hindu people have possessed in their present forms two great poems, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The first of these is their Wars of Troy, their Heimskringla, their Mort d'Arthur. That is to say, it is the books of the deeds and the wars of the heroes. Thanks to a long-established culture of the race, and the prestige which all literature enjoys as sacred, the Mahabharata is to this day the strongest influence in the shaping of the lives and ambitions of Hindu boys. The battle which it describes took place, if at all, very nearly 1500 years before the birth of Christ. It lasted many days, and the field of combat was called Kurukshetra, being situated on that great plain near Delhi, where critical moments in the history of India have been so often decided. For many a century after Kurukshetra, the wandering bards all over India sang of the great battle, and when any new theme claimed their creative powers, it had to be recounted as if originally told by one of the heroes to another, at some particular point in the course of the main narrative. In this way, the heart's heart of the whole poem, the Bhagavad Gita, a title translated by some scholars as Gospel of the Bhagavats, brings an interesting instance of double drama with it. The Gita consists in itself of a dialogue between a young chieftain and Krishna, the divine personage who is acting as his charioteer, at the moment of the opening of the 18 days' combat. But the device which enables the conversation to be given in detail is the picture of an old blind king, head of one of the rival houses, seated some miles away, and attended in his anxiety by a man of what is called yogic or hyperesthetic, that is, psychic sense, who utters to him every word that is spoken. The exquisite story of Savitri, similarly, is told by a rishi, or great sage, to Yudhisthira, at the close of day, during the banishment of the 5 Pandavas to the forest. On this plan, more than half of the countryside tales of northern India could be woven into the Mahabharata when it was first thrown into form by some unknown hand 3 or 4 centuries before Christ. It underwent its final recension not more than 200 or 300 years later, a possible 1500 years after the occurrence of the events which are its central theme. It is easy to see that this saga fulfills thus all the conditions of great epic poetry. The stories that it tells have been worked over by the imagination of singers and people for hundreds of years. They have become simple, direct, inevitable. They are spoken out of the innermost heart of a nation, not yet dreaming of self-consciousness. They are nothing if not absolutely sincere. Comparing the Mahabharata with the Iliad and Odyssey, we find it less formed, less highly wrought, more amorphous, but also more brilliant and intense. To quote a great Indian writer on Indian thought, outline is entirely lost in color. These characteristics do not hold good to the same extent of the second Indian epic, the Ramayana, which has a closely worked motive running throughout. This poem, the tale of the exile of Sita and Rama, received its present form not long after the Mahabharata, early in the Buddhist period. It is supposed that under Buddhist influence the monastic life had come to be so honored that the flower of the nation were drawn to it, rather than to the mingled responsibilities and joys of the home. The romantic reaction in ideals which was inevitable gathered itself about the ancient theme of a princely couple of the house of Oath, in whom all that was precious in monasticism was found blended with all that was desirable in sovereignty and love. The strong and quiet story spoke straight to the heart of the people, and to this day there are no characters so beloved by the masses as those of the Ramayana, no one force that goes so far towards the molding of Indian womanhood as the ever-living touch of the little hand of that Sita who is held to have been queen of Ayodhya thousands of years ago. The Ramayana, then, is a love story which grew up and came to its flowering in the beginning of the Christian era. But it is unlike all other romances of that early epoch in the subtlety and distinctiveness of its various characters, and in the complexity of its interpretation of life. For though humanity itself may differ little from age to age, we have become accustomed to look for a definite growth in its literary self-reflection. We expect primitive poetry to be preoccupied with events, portraying men and women only in bold outline, as they move with simple grandeur through their fate. We do not look to it for the subtle analysis of motive, or any exact mingling of the sweet and bitter cups of the personal life. The progress of literature up to this time has been largely, as we think, the intensifying recognition of human variation within a given psychological area. And in making such a statement, we take pains to eliminate from the word progress all sense of improvement, since Homer remains forever superior to Browning. Simply, we find in art a parallel to the physical process by which the race moves on from strong family and communal types to a universal individual divergence. An overwhelming appreciation of spiritual content is what we have been ready in Europe to call the modern spirit. It is a question whether the name can stand, however, when the Indian epics become better known. For, strangely enough, in spite of their age and the heroic nature of their matter, they are permeated with this very quality. In the Ramayana especially, as incident leads to incident, we have to realize that this is no story told for our amusement, but a woman's soul laid bare before us, as she climbs from steep to steep of renunciation. Perhaps only those who are in touch with national aspiration can fully understand the roundness and plasticity of this drama, but even the most cursory reader must be struck with this insight and delicacy of the Ramayana. It is more today than a completed work of art. It is still a means for the development of the popular imagination. Even among the written versions, we find no two quite alike. All children are brought up on the story, yet those who can read the original Sanskrit are few in number. To meet this fact, translations have been made into various vernaculars by great poets from time to time, into Bengali, for instance, by Krittabas, and into Hindi by Tulsidas. Special incidents again have been selected and worked up into great episodes in Sanskrit by one and another, such as Bhavabhuti in his Exile of Sita, or Datta in the epic of Ravana. In these versions, the story becomes more and more clearly defined. Pulsing through every Ramayana runs the Hindu reverence for Rama as man, husband, and king. This reverence may seek new modes of expression, but it can never admit that that which is expressed was at any time less than the ideal. Yet we must remember that that ideal is in the ancient terms, Oriental rather than Occidental. It belonged to a conception of the duty that placed society far above the individual, and made the perfect king seek the good of his people without any consideration for his own or his wife's happiness. The fact that made his marriage perfect was its complete demonstration that it was as possible for two as for one to devote themselves first to the general weal. For the acquiescence of Sita is given in her 20 years of silent banishment. Once during that time, says one of the regional poets, she saw her husband as he passed through the forest where she was and kept silence still. And though the incident is an addition not found in the original, it only serves to bring out more clearly the intention of the first poem, where every dumb moment of those 20 years speaks louder than words, the wife's acquiescence to her husband's will. Behind the vernacular translators stands all those old nurses and grandams on whose laps the poet themselves first heard the great tale, and it is their perfect freedom to give their own versions of each episode, as must any of us in recounting actual happenings, that keeps it fresh and living and explains its changes of tint in the hands of genius. Without the recognition of this working of the communal consciousness on the theme, there can be no complete criticism of the Ramayana, for of this are all new transcribings of the story born. It is more or less in this fashion that the old tale is told. Long ago, in the ages of the heroes, there dwelt kings of Oudh, of whose race came one Ramayana, heir to the throne, great of heart, and goodly to look upon. And Rama was wedded to Sita, daughter of Janaka the king, fairest and purest of all the children of men. Now Rama had been trained in all knowledge and in the sports of princes, living, as was the manner of those days, in the forest, with his brother Lakshman, in the care of a great sage. After it happened, after he was come home again and wedded to Sita, that there arose a trouble between the king and his father, and one of the younger queens, Kaikeyi, who desired that her son Bharata should inherit the throne, and pleaded that her husband had once promised her whatever gift she should desire. And when one told Rama of this contention that was embittering his father's age, he replied at once by a vow to renounce the throne and retire to the forest for 14 years. And gladly, he said, was this vow made, since it would give pleasure to Kaikeyi, his stepmother, and confer on Bharata, his younger brother, the kingdom and its wealth. And Sita, overhearing the vow, added hers to his, in spite of his entreaties that she should not quit her royal state. Lakshman also declared that he would not be separated from his elder brother. So all three fared forth together into the great forest. Thither, shortly after, followed Bharata, saying that the king their father was now dead of grief at the wrong done his eldest son, and imploring Rama to return and take his own place in his kingdom, for Bharata had mingled no whit in the scheming of Kaikeyi. But Rama refused till the days of his vow should be ended. After 14 years, he said, he would return and reign. Then very reluctantly went Bharata back to Oudh, but he carried with him the sandals of Rama, declaring that these should hold the throne, and he himself sit always below them, governing in their name. Left in the forest, the life of Sita, Rama, and Lakshman became that of gentle anchorites, and they grew great in all manner of woodcraft, so that the wild creatures answered to their call. But Rama and Lakshman never ceased to remember their knighthood, holding themselves ready with sword and bow for the services of all who were in distress. It was on one of their expeditions of knight-errantry that they offended a great ogress, and brought on themselves the enmity of her powerful kinsman, Raban the Ten-Headed, king of the island of Lanka or Ceylon. It was inevitable that some of the skalds who chanted the deeds of Rama should attach themselves specially to the character of this mythical Raban, elaborating all connected with him. Hence, just as Hector and Andromache are amongst the most beautiful figures in the Iliad, so in the Indian poem is Mandodari, the wife of Raban, one of the strongest personages, at least from a literary point of view. And to this day old wives tell of the incident that has crept into no published poem. When the time came, they say, that Rama had conquered and slain his 10-headed foe, Mandodari was inconsolable that she was now a widow. Then it was declared to her that till her husband's funeral fire was dead, she should be no widow, and that fire should burn forever. And so, sure enough, we have only to shut our eyes tight, and we hear the roaring of the flames that are burning Raban to ashes. For so it was that Rama had to defeat and slay this evil king in order to recover Sita, who had been stolen from him. The story of the taking of Sita is as beautiful as Pluto's capture of Proserpine. It is the close of day in the forest, and Sita is alone. Lakshman, one of the most perfect gentle knights in the whole range of fiction, has left her at her earnest entreaty that he should go to seek for Rama, but he has first drawn 3 circles about her with the end of his bow, and warned her not to step outside. The sun is not yet set, however, when a Brahmin appears, ashen-clad, with matted locks, and begs for charity. Sita pleads that it is late, and she is alone, imploring him to go. And this he promises to do, if only first she will step outside and give him a little food. She is full of dim forebodings of evil, but pity at last gains the upper hand of fear. She steps out of her enchanted circles to bestow alms on him, He throws off the disguise of the Brahmin, appears as Raban himself, and carries her off to his kingdom in his chariot. It is during the first terrible moments of the journey that Sita drops her jewels stealthily behind her, in order that those coming after may be able to trace her flight. Surely this picture of the exiled queen, standing amidst the long shadows in her simple hut, lost in the struggle between her desire to aid and all the invisible safeguards of her womanhood, is one that deserves the brush of some great painter. For years Sita is kept confined in Lanka, and Rama and Lakshman, in their progress through what is depicted as the wilderness of southern India, owe her discovery and much of their success in finally releasing her to the services of their great ally Hanuman, the monkey general. It is supposed that if there be any historical foundation for the legend of the Ramayana, this name of Hanuman may refer to the chieftain of some strong aboriginal tribe. In any case, he stands today for all that is great in discipleship. Filled with the worship of Rama, he brings to his service the unquestioning obedience of a child and the genius of a man. It is in his presence and that of Lakshman that Sita goes proudly, at her own request, through that ordeal by fire which is to prove her stainlessness, and as he dies he declares that the names of Sita and Rama will be found written on his heart. It is now time for the return to the kingdom, and Sita and Rama go back to Oudh, reigning there in perfect happiness close upon a year. Then comes the great crisis of their parting, in deference to the people's doubt of Sita. She retires to a distant forest to live the life of a nun, under the care of Valmiki, the old hermit, and Rama sits alone on the throne of Oudh for the rest of his life. Once only does he speak of his loss. His subjects desire him to take a new queen, for the performance of a state sacrifice that he cannot make alone. But here the wrath of the king blazes forth. No woman shall ever be put in Sita's place. But a golden image of her is made, and fills her part in the appointed ceremonies. Shortly after her arrival in the forest, Sita had become the mother of twin sons, and Valmiki, their foster father, brings these up as princes, only taking care to add to their education the knowledge of his own great poem, the Ramayana. He allows it to be supposed also that their mother is dead. When the boys are some 20 years of age, news goes about the country of a great religious festival to be held at the court of Ayodhya, and the hermit makes ready to go up to it, taking his 2 foster sons in the character of minstrels and the queen. The rest of the story is inevitable. The eyes of Rama discover his boys as they recite before him the deeds of his own past, and calling Valmiki to him, he speaks with hopeless longing the name of Sita. The old man draws her forward, and she unveils her face to her husband. At this moment, as the two look, each upon the face that had been present to every thought for 20 years, the murmur of the people's doubt is once more heard, and the cry rises from the crowd, "Let her be tried by fire!" No woman's pride could brook this renewed insult. Sita, the proud, the silent, the stainless, cries out for death. At her words the ground opens, a chariot appears, and in the arms of her Mother Earth she is withdrawn from the world of men. Rama waits only to bestow the kingdom on his sons, and then plunges into the forest, to be forever lost to humanity. The story of the Mahabharata would be less easy to recount. Mighty warriors, beautiful women, and great saints move to and fro across its scenes in a glittering melee. The local color is rich to a fault. The poem abounds in descriptions of social customs, domestic comfort, the fashions of old armor, and similar details. But it is in the conception of character which it reveals that it becomes most significant. Bhishma, the Indian Arthur, is there with his perfect knighthood and awful purity of soul. Lancelot is there, a glorified Lancelot, whose only fall was the utterance of a half-truth once, with purpose to mislead, in the person of the young king Yudhisthira. And Krishna, the Indian Christ, is there, in that guise of prince and leader of men that has given him the name in India of the perfect incarnation. One of the rival houses consists of a family of no less than 100 children, so that the multiplicity of persons and incidents is best left to the imagination. Yet certain main features belong to the treatment of all characters alike. For the attention of the poet chronicler is fixed on the invisible shackles of selfhood that binds us all. He seems to be describing great events. In reality, he does not for one instant forget that he is occupied with the history of souls, depicting the incidents of their experience and knowledge on the external world. One story is typical. The young princes are taking a lesson in shooting, and a clay bird has been set up as target. One by one they are asked by their master what they see. They reply, "A bird," "a branch supporting a bird," and so on, till at last he puts the question to Arjuna, one of the youngest, and receives the answer, "A bird's head, and in that head only the eye." The moment of the telling of this story to an Indian child is tense with feeling, for he embodies the culminating ideal of the nation, inasmuch as concentration of mind stands among Hindus for the supreme expression of that greatness which we may recognize in honor or courage, or any kind of heroism. The central character of the Mahabharata fulfills a very subtle demand. Bhishma is intended for the type of king and knight. Now, knighthood implies the striking of many blows, and kinghood the protecting of manifold and diverse interests. But perfection requires that nothing shall be done from the motive of self-interest. In order, therefore, that he may display all the greatness of character that is possible to a man in these relations, Bhishma is made, as heir to the throne, to renounce all rights of succession, and even of marriage, at the beginning of his life, by way of setting his father free to marry a fisher girl whom he loves, and make her son his heir. From this point, having set aside the privileges of parent and sovereign, Bhishma is made to bear to the full the responsibilities of both, and finally, in the energy and faithfulness of his military service, life itself can only be taken from him when he with his own lips have given instructions for his defeat. In Bhishma, therefore, we have the creation of a people who have already learnt to regard detachment as a necessary element of moral grandeur. It is strange to us, but perfectly consistent with this point of view, that as long as Bhishma remains a militant figure in the battle of Kurukshetra, he is acting as generalissimo for what he regards as the worst cause of the two. He has done his best to prevent the war, but when it is determined on, he sets himself to obey his sovereign in the place that is his own. He is filled, as the Indian poet represents him, with supernatural assurance that his side must lose, yet he strikes not a single blow, either more or less, for this consideration. In like manner, it is told of Krishna that after he has done his utmost for peace in the interests of justice, he is approached by both parties for his aid, and that such is the calmness of his outlook on life that he submits the matter to a moral test. To one claimant he will give his armies. The other he will serve in person unarmed, he says, leaving the choice to themselves. It is clear that the man whose greed and ambition are plunging whole nations into war will not have the spiritual insight to choose the divine person for his champion rather than great hosts, and he does not. Such stories illustrate the Hindu endeavor to understand every man's relation to a given situation, and to read in conflicting lines of conduct that same irresistible necessity which, acting from within, hurls each one of us upon his fate. In this endeavor lies the real secret of that tolerance which has so puzzled observers in the Indian people. Not only has there never been religious persecution among Hindus, but the skeptic, the atheist, or the Christian missionary is as free to preach on the steps of the temple as the believing priest. The European correlative of the trait is found in the dramatist or novelist of genius who can represent the motives of opposing sides so as to draw equally upon our sympathy. But this has always been an exceptional ability with us, and not a common attitude of mind. In the Mahabharata itself, the most perfect expression of such reconciliation of opposites is perhaps found in the story of Shishupal, the enemy of Krishna. Shishupal's mother had won Krishna's promise that her son might sin against him 100 times, and yet be forgiven. But this cup of error was already full when his crowning blasphemy occurred. The occasion was that of the offering of certain honors to the chief of knights. Krishna, in right of his divinity, had already been named, and the decision that to him should the sacrifice be made was spoken. To the deep-rooted hostility of Shishupal, however, this was unendurable. He broke out into indignant protest. In what sense, he asked, was Krishna greatest of the knights? Was not Bhishma present? Was not Yudhisthira their liege? Let the honors be paid to one of these. Shocked and outraged, everyone looked at Bhishma to punish the impiety. But that aged clansman's face was turned toward the avatar. Then, as all waited in suspense, from behind the blessed knight flashed forth the bright discus of Vishnu, and striking the helmet of Shishupal clove him through, even to the ground. And lo, there before their eyes, the soul of that sinful one came forth like a mass of flame, and passed over and melted into the feet of Krishna. For even the enemies of God go to salvation, says the old chronicler, by thinking much upon him. A later increment of explanation makes the point still clearer. It had happened in some previous age that a great and enlightened spirit had fallen under a curse, had strayed, that is to say, into those circles of destiny that would involve him in human birth. And the All-Merciful, being touched with pity, offered him the path of return through 7 births as the friend of God, or 3 as his enemy. The second alternative was his instant choice, and he became in one life Ravana, the foe of Rama, in another a certain persecuting king, and in the third this Shishupal, now once more absorbed into eternal bliss. Few characters in literature can rank with the heroic figure of young Karna. Dark with anger but perfect in chivalry, he resents to the death a slight leveled at his birth, yet turns in the midst of princely acclaims to salute reverently the aged charioteer supposed to be his father. Full of a palpitating humanity is Draupadi, the Pandava queen. Beautiful and high-spirited as she is, she has all a woman's inability to keep a secret, and her foolish boastfulness almost betrays the heroes before their time is ripe. The strongest attraction of such figures is always their actuality. There is nothing incredibly exalted about them, but good and evil are entwined in their natures, strong and heroic though they be, as in us all. The end of Bhishma is like that of some ancient Norseman. Lying on the field of battle where he fell, he refuses to be moved, and asks only for a bed and pillow, such as are fit for knightly bowmen. One of the young chiefs divines his meaning and, stepping forward, shoots arrows into the earth till what was desired has been provided. And on his bed of arrows Bhishma dies. Such are some of the characters who form the ideal world of the Hindu home. Absorbed in her worship of the feet of the Lord, the little girl sits for hours in her corner praying, "Make me a wife like Sita. Give me a husband like Rama." Each act or speech of the untrained boy rushing in from school may remind someone, half laughing, half admiring, of Yudhisthira or Lakshman or Karna or Arjuna, and the name is sure to be recalled. It is expected that each member of the family shall have his favorite hero, who will be to him a sort of patron saint, and may appear as the center of the story, if he is bidden to recount it. Thus, when one tells the Ramayana, Ravana is the hero, another makes it Hanuman. Only the books keep it always Sita and Rama. And it is well understood that the chosen ideal exercises a preponderant influence over one's own development. None could love Lakshman without growing more full of gentle courtesy and tender consideration for the needs of others. He who cares for Hanuman cannot fail to become more capable of supreme devotion and ready service. And justice itself must reign in the heart that adores Yudhisthira. The character of Bhishma in the Mahabharata, as that of Sita in the Ramayana, is a proof that Indian philosophy was completed before the epics. But that philosophy itself, we must remember, was directly related to the common life of common folk. Only this fact can explain the recognition and welcome of such conceptions by the whole nation. Let us look at the love story of Sita. Her feeling is consecrated by the long years of poverty filled with worship in the forest. When it is thus established, she undergoes the dreary persecution and imprisonment at the hands of Ravana. Every moment finds her repeating the name of Rama, her faith unshaken by her ultimate rescue. At the end, she herself suggests the fiery ordeal and goes through it with dauntless courage. Then, for one short year, as wife and queen and future mother, she tastes of entire earthly happiness, only to be swept away from her home again in the sternness of her husband's will for his people's good. Through 20 years of acquiescent silence, She keeps now, in all its fullness, that love that sent her first to share Rama's exile in the forest, and yet the perfection of her pride of womanhood is shown when she dies of an insult conveyed in a spoken doubt. We believe vaguely that the power to renounce distinguishes the human from all life known to us. But a conception of renunciation so searching, so austere as this appalls us. It is clear that a commanding philosophy of self-discipline lay behind, or the poet's hand could not have been so remorseless. But it is also clear that that philosophy was living in the heart and effort of the people, or Sita and Rama could not have been so loved. We ask in vain what can have been the life of India before she found refuge and direction in such dreams as these. For today it has become so one with them that all trace of the dawn before they were is lost. They penetrate to every part of the country, every class of society, every grade of education. Journeying in the mountains at nightfall, one came upon the small open hut of a grain dealer, and saw, round a tiny lamp, a boy reading the Ramayana in the vernacular to a circle of his elders. At the end of each stanza they bowed their head to the earth with the chant, "To dear Sita's bridegroom, great Rama, all hail." The shopkeeper in the city counts out his wares to the customer, saying, "1 Ram, 2 Ram, 3 Ram," and so on, relapsing into a dream of worship when the measuring is done. Nay, once at least it is told how at the 4 Ram the blessed name was enough to touch the inmost soul of him who uttered it, and he rose up then and there and left the world behind him. The woman terrified at thunder calls on Sita Ram, and the bearers of the dead keep time to the cry of Nama Rama Sattva Hai. The name of the Lord alone is real. What philosophy by itself could never have done for the humble, what the laws of Manu have done only in some small measure for the few, that the epics have done through unnumbered ages and are doing still for all classes alike. They are the perpetual Hinduizers, for they are the ideal embodiments of that form of life, that conception of conduct, of which laws and theories can give but the briefest abstract, yet towards which the hope and effort of every Hindu child must be directed. We are in the habit of talking of the changeless East, and though there is a certain truth in the phrase, there is also a large element of fallacy. One of the most striking features of Hindu society during the past 50 years has been the readiness of the people to adopt a foreign form of culture and to compete with those who are native to that culture on equal terms. In medicine, in letters, in science, even in industry, where there has been opportunity, we are astonished at the intellectual adaptability of the race. Is the mere beckoning of the finger of the 19th century enough to subvert predilections as old as Babylon and Nineveh? By no means. Such changes as these are merely surface deep. The hauteur of the East lies in the very knowledge that its civilization has nothing to fear from the social and intellectual experiments of its youngsters, or even from such complete changes of mental raiment as amongst newer peoples would constitute revolutions of thought. For the effort of Eastern civilization has always been to the solitary end of moralizing the individual, and in this way it differs essentially from Western systems of culture, which have striven rather for the most efficient use of materials. If Alexander, capable of organizing the largest number of his fellows most effectively for a combination of military, commercial, and scientific ends in the most difficult form, an armed expedition over hostile territory, if Alexander be taken as the type of Occidental genius, then, as the culminating example of the Oriental, we must name Buddha. For clear and intense conceptions of perfect renunciation and inner illumination are the hidden springs of Hindu living, around which the home itself is built. These it is of which the epics are the popular vehicles. These it is which gives its persistence to Indian civilization through the centuries, and this is why no examination syllabus, no alien's kindly inspiration, no foreigner's appreciation or contempt, can ever hope to have one iota of permanent influence on the national education at its core. Reforming sects are very apt to reject what is much cultivated amongst the orthodox, the folklore that has grown up round the epics, in the Puranas and other literature. but to the poems themselves all cling fast. None fail to realize that they bear the mark of supreme literature, and so they remain a constant element capable, like all great interpretations of life, of infinitely varied application, a treasure greater, because more greatly used, than any anger of Achilles or descent into purgatory amongst them all. End of chapter 7.